I didn't realize until I had gone to Japan. I studied with Terayama Roshi, Zen calligraphy and Zen martial arts, until I realized what I had been looking for in judo, in martial arts, what I had been looking for in music, that truth, that deeper meaning. Only then, through Terayama Roshi, I realized that I had been looking for that Zen part. Well, then it all started making sense. So, we all have enlightened nature, awakened nature already in us. And the practice and the path is simply becoming more and more familiar with it, so that there is no dualistic notion of self and other, and also no psychic injury or trauma in the system anymore. That's it. There is nothing else to spirituality.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Lion Face Guru podcast. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Amrita Baba, founder and head teacher of Amrita Mandala Sangha, a modern lineage of Tantric yoga with its mission to bring the highest teachings of yoga and pragmatic dharma to modern seekers worldwide, the path from initial awakening to full enlightenment. Amrita Baba is also my teacher. I will be interviewing Amrita Baba about his own personal journey of awakening, from his early experiences as a Zen monk in Japan, his disillusionment with orthodox methods of spirituality that weren't leading him to the existential freedom he was seeking, and his relentless quest to find actual practical solutions to the path of awakening, methods that reveal the whole path, from initial awakening through the stages of awakening to revealing true nature of mind, and through the stages of stabilizing true nature of mind all the way to emptiness realization, first stage Buddhahood. And finally, his discovery so far along the path of lightbody, the teachings that take one to full Buddhahood, known as full rainbow body, also known as the body of immortality or resurrection body. Amrita Baba is a Tertön, which is a Tibetan word meaning revealer of spiritual treasures. Baba has revealed and synthesized the teachings of past masters so they are suitable for modern lay practitioners. Many Tertöns have been known throughout history, and Baba has openly talked about his communication with non-physical masters, numerous past masters from various spiritual traditions, such as Padmasambhava, Jesus, and Babaji. So in this interview, I also want to explore with Baba how this process comes about, what the experience is like communicating with non-physical masters, and how it has been to put all of these teachings together, whilst also navigating the path himself and forming a Sangha at the same time. Baba began revealing these teachings long before he reached enlightenment himself, and so he has been navigating the journey with his students. Now Amrita Baba and 19 of his students have completed the path of emptiness realization, i.e. the first stage of Buddhahood. It has definitely not been an easy path, and there are still many challenges to face and the remainder of the journey to full Buddhahood, that of attaining the light body. For more information about Amrita Baba, the teaching methods, and Amrita Mandala Sangha, please visit amritamandala.com. The interview has been split up into two parts, and this is part one. Enjoy.
Oh, when you went through all those things in the introduction, it brought back instantly so many memories. And, so it's been this month marks 15 years of myself being a full-time teacher. 15 years since October 2008. So it's been a pretty long haul until this point. And by the way, the number is not 19 students who reached emptiness at this point, but 21.
Oh, it's 21 now. Oh, wow. Yeah. Cool.
The 20th I have already verified, but 21st is still on the, test period.
Oh, yeah. Oh, good. So thank you for joining me in this interview.
My pleasure.
We should probably start from the early days. So I wanted to ask, can you begin by describing how did spirituality show up in your life? How did the path begin for you?
Well, out of out of I have a bit limited vocabulary. Some days when I speak English, I don't have no problems, but other days it can be, I remember like 200 words, and then I have to try to manage with those 200. But I guess I could say that out of necessity, because my father was an alcoholic, and he was a wonderful man, kind man, but he was severely traumatized as a child himself. My grandfather was in the war and he was very traumatized. He was actually diagnosed with schizophrenia, my grandfather, but it wasn't schizophrenia, it was PTSD. This is something I realized later on, that it was PTSD, like severe PTSD, that he was suffering of, and then he brought his awful war memories and experiences and himself traumatized back home, and then they started having children, and it's a pretty common story in Finland actually, war trauma, and passed from one generation to the other. So, for example, most of my friends had exactly the same kind of family history. My hometown is this small old mining town close to the border of Russia in Finland, and the mine was closed in 1989 when I was 10 years old. But it's like a mining town, so rough men who've been to war, and Eastern Finland especially was touched by war, so everybody was affected by it. And so was my father, and that's why he was self-medicating with alcohol from very early on. Like, he had very bad social anxiety. I remember he passed away over 10 years ago at the age of 59. But I remember throughout the years that I saw my father in situation when he was very socially anxious. And I don't blame him for being alcoholic. And he could have been much worse as alcoholic. He wasn't violent, he wasn't aggressive. So he was very kind man, but he just had this weakness due to his trauma. But anyway, I saw in my family, in my childhood home, and everywhere around me, in this mining town, in this eastern part of Finland, everybody was so in so much anguish and pain. Everybody, wherever you looked, it was everywhere. Because it's just one generation before everybody was involved with war, and they saw killing in mass scale and very traumatizing sights, very traumatizing experiences, followed by years of not having much food, having to start life from scratch. So these were the circumstances where I was born into. And seeing that, maybe it was overwhelming, but overwhelming isn't the word that I would describe my feeling about it. It simply was like I started, our family, I was baptized as Russian Orthodox. In Finland there are two main churches, Lutheran Christian and Orthodox Christian, Russian Orthodox. But my family wasn't religious at all. By that time, I was born in 1979, and by 80s, most people were already kind of disillusioned by religion, which is partially good and partially bad. It's a topic of itself, but people didn't really practice religion anymore at that point in Finland. So I didn't get any instruction, like spiritual instruction. But nevertheless, when I felt this, I would say that this overwhelming pain and confusion and suffering in my family. My mother, she had to take care of three small children, well, my sister and my brother, they are a bit older than I am, but nevertheless, 3 children, support the family by herself, and so she was working all the time, lots of responsibility, bills to pay, and then my father was drinking. He would come and go and come and go. So in this situation, I simply started to go to my room. I remember like it happened yesterday. I remember that building where we lived and where our apartment was, and I remember my sister and my room. We had a room with my sister, and I would go to sit on the edge of my bed. We had a bunk bed, and my sister was sleeping on the top bed, and I would sit on my bed and just close my eyes. And when I did that, or I might say prayers, like nobody taught me this, nobody told me to do this. When you feel anxious about what's going on around you, go and sit. Nobody told me this. Nobody, this was something that I spontaneously did. So I went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and sometimes I was just sitting silently, and there was this energy, this light in figuratively saying, not actual light, but this spiritual energy that filled me and filled the whole room, and it felt like the room became completely full of light. And sometimes I would pray, I would pray for the well-being of my family, and then my relatives and people of the city and people of the country, and then spreading to whole earth, whole humanity. I would do that. And then I would also do breathing practices sometimes. So there was no program. This was just some little practices or techniques that I did, that came to my mind, that I started spontaneously doing. And interestingly, some of those practices, breathing practices specifically, we practice in Amrita Mandala. Deep inhalations, exhalations, breath retention, what we know as physical dynamic concentration, where you flex your muscles. These practices I did spontaneously.
How old were you at this point? You were quite young.
It started happening at around 3 years old.
Mm-hmm. Very young then.
Yeah. And it would happen like a few times a week for many years. Then it a bit changed when I became like a teenager. By then my mother had remarried, and the situation at home was I guess you could say better, but still a bit problematic. So there was no emotional support, or so I didn't at that point, a teenager, I didn't do those sitting sessions anymore, but I would have these cessations, these cessations when they start happening to people, to some people very early on. It's like being struck by a lightning. So it's like a shock, and then you realize that shock happened a moment after. So that started happening in my early teens and continued until I started practicing Zen Buddhism at the age of 23. So
it's a cessation, a release of the selfing mechanism, realizing a glimpse of your true nature. Perhaps it's easier to say it like that. This Buddha nature is revealed into you spontaneously.
yes, but it wasn't like that because I didn't know what it was, and it was for many years. And this would happen, the cessations when they started happening, that would happen very often, like at least every other day.
Oh, wow, that's a lot.
But these were not, maybe there was a little bit of relief of stress and trauma, maybe a little bit, but there was a point when I became worried, like, am I going crazy, or what are these, thunder strikes that I'm experiencing every other day. So I didn't know what they were. And they also didn't, they were just like quick flashes.
Mm.
So they didn't really have a permanent effect on me. Maybe there was something like in terms of creating some kind of baseline, because I became like a now when I look back into my early teens, I was focusing on playing the guitar and music very very strongly. My big brother, he's a musician still, and he had a lot of impact on me actually from when I was 2 3 years old, because he was into rock music and heavy metal music. Everybody in those days in Finland was into heavy metal music. This is something that other people from other cultures have hard time understanding, but you know, if you look at kids from my brothers and my generation, you cannot find a kid who didn't listen to hard rock and heavy metal. You just can't, because everybody was listening to it. Everybody was listening to pop music also, but hard rock was very big in Finland. So, so my brother had a lot of how do you say, a lot of effect on me since early on, and I still listen to that kind of music. I listen to many other types, but a lot of rock and heavy metal. But yeah, when I was 10, 11 years old, after practicing several years judo and competing in judo, I then got into music, and I spent my whole teens and actually until just before I started practicing Zen at 23. I sold my music studio just a few months before that. So throughout those years, I was full time in music, practicing a lot,
Mm.
playing a lot of gigs in different kinds of settings, making music, and then later on producing music, making music for radio station and theaters and different kinds of events. So that's my professional training. I'm a music producer and musician. Yeah.
Mm. So this was you trying to, as a teenager, trying to carve an avenue for your life. And I remember hearing you say at one point, when you were at school, was it perhaps a monk visited or something, but you weren't around at the time, but your friends said, "Oh, you should have been here with this monk." So there was obviously some spirituality still in the background somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, there was. And so, in retrospect, when looking at myself as a young teenager, very early on when I found music, because I had tried to find the truth, let's put it that way, I had
Yeah.
tried to find the meaning of life from judo and from martial arts. But then it was very like a sports like. I learned many great things from my judo teacher. Like he taught me to meditate a little bit, sit silently, and then he was a masseur professionally. So he was my first shiatsu teacher, Japanese style massage. Uh, so I learned many, many wonderful things, simple things from him, but it was still the judo part was very sports like. So I went to martial arts having this some inner sense that I need to find something greater, bigger than life, or something like this from judo, but I didn't find it after many years of doing it pretty intensively. And then I continued that same thing with guitar and music. So I remember when I was a teenager, I was probably a pain in the ass because I was always talking to my friends who were also heavily into music, that you know music is something bigger than life, and that we can find this truth or this meaning of life from music. So I was always talking about this, and I remember buying I was just I moved recently to Slovenia, and I was unpacking the moving boxes, and I put up my library and my books, and I came across the first book of yoga that I bought when I was 14. It was from library sales. and I still have that book. So I got interested in, through martial arts, I got interested about yoga and breathing practices and mantras and meditation at 14, 15. And then I moved to the capital area when I was 16 to go to music high school. So this offered me like not only access to greater musical culture and artistic culture, but also spirituality. But this was 1995 in Finland, and even though it's the capital of Finland where I lived, uh, Finland comes easily like 30, 40 years behind the rest of mainland Europe in terms of spirituality. So there was only like 2 or 3 meditation groups that time. But I went and I uh, found some books of spirituality, different types. I remember reading Thich Nhat Hanh's book in the late 90s and Dalai Lama's book and Sri Chinmoy's book and books like this. And I didn't understand what they were saying. So, the time wasn't ready for me to really go into spiritual practice. But at the same time, I was deeply and professionally training in music. So that's how my life was back then. Oh, and one very important memory I have is from, it was probably during the first year in high school when I was already living on my own. I remember reading an interview of a Russian Orthodox priest from newspaper. And in that interview, he said that real wisdom of life comes from remembering death. That's one sentence, and it really, really hit me. Like somehow it clicked me, and I even remember thinking that this was something that the priest had learned elsewhere, because the rest of the interview didn't really have such depth. But that was very, very useful and it struck a chord in me in a way that I remembered it for years. And now that it's been almost 30 years since, I feel that this was like a preliminary practice for me, because I kept remembering impermanence of our physical body. I kept remembering death. So at the back of my mind, I had it. I would party when I would party very, very heavily during those musician years. And then I got trained as a music producer and did had girlfriends and had very good, friends to hang out with. But in the back of my mind, I had this idea of inevitably I will pass away one day. So it kind of gave a context for my daily living, kind of put it into a different frame. And this was very meaningful to me at the time, because I still hadn't, like I said, that I read some books, visited some meditation groups every now and then, but it was still in the making, like coming to practice properly. It was in the making. So all these factors.
Why do you think it hit you so hard then? Were you reflecting on your death, imagining that you might die, but also you had a dog that died, didn't you, when you were younger?
You just reminded me of the dog. I have 2 very early memories, and I think my first memory is when my family, we were living in countryside in eastern Finland, in this village that is tiny. Most of my relatives still live in that village, and so I remember one winter evening. It was very cold evening. I remember that, and it's like in the countryside there. It's pitch black. There are no street lights. There's only the light from moon and stars. And when it is very cold, the light is very bright. So even at night, the ground is covered with very thick, lots of snow, pure white snow. So when there's little light coming from stars and moon, it's actually pretty illuminated, the whole panoramic view there. And it was one evening I remember sensing that that something was different. I was maybe 2 years old, something, but this dog had been in my life for 2 years since I was born, right? So, I had gotten to know the dog and I petted it and it really enjoyed to be with me and my siblings. And this one evening, the dog asked to go out, and for some reason my father let it out, and I went to the window next to the door, and I opened the curtain, and I could see that the dog kind of took wobbly steps, maybe like 5-10 meters from the door, and then it just collapsed to the side. And the thought of, there wasn't thought immediately. I just looked and observed, and the dog didn't get up, and I was looking at it. And then my parents, I might have said something like, the dog's name was Jesse, or Jesse, you would say in English. So I told them that Jesse is not getting up, and they knew that it had died. And then I remember asking, next morning we buried the dog with my father behind the house. And then I asked my parents that, what happened to Jesse? And what they answered that he had died, but they couldn't explain to me what death was. Maybe I didn't understand it either at 2 years old, but their answer didn't satisfy me. And this is my first memory. My second memory is my mother and father having a violent fight. So, and this was, my main trauma, became my main trauma. But, maybe seeing my dog die that early did have some imprint, and it did. Maybe I just remembered it from that priest's interview somehow, yeah.
Then you seemed, it sounded like you were quite open-minded, or at least you're in an exploratory phase in your teenage years, because you went to a couple of meditation classes, but was one a Buddhism, one was a Hinduism?
Yeah, I remember there was it was Buddhist meditation group that gathered in a back room of a Tibetan shop. Like a shop that sold like a Tibetan, different kinds of decorative items and clothing and carpets and stuff like this. But it wasn't like a high quality Tibetan stuff, but like kind of low quality. So like a hippie type shop. And then there was a meditation meeting there, like Tuesday evening or something. So that was one that I went to. I remember going to Diamond Way group in the late 90s. I remember meeting one man who from in that Diamond Way group, this one Finnish guy. I don't remember his name anymore. I wish I could, because I would send him a message or go see him to thank him. But I remember this man, he was maybe 35 years old at the time, and I was 17, 18. But he had gone to India a number of times and met with lamas and rinpoches and studied with them. And he invited me to his home, and we had tea or coffee, and he told me about his experience with meditation, and he gave me some little instructions. And then he also gave me, it was small picture, like nicely wrapped in like a, what do you call, like ornamented fabric? What do you call that when you have golden threads and well, like fancy, very fancy cloth. There was a small framed picture of some Dharmapala, like a protector deity. But I don't remember what it was, but there was like a wrathful deity there. He gifted me that. Then he gave me a meditation cushion and Edward Conze's translation of the Prajna Paramita Sutras.
Wow.
Book this big, this thick. And I couldn't understand a word of it. but but it was pretty incredible gift to get.
So I'm wondering now, how did you go through your musician years? You must have come to some sort of crunch point that then all of a sudden in the story, in my mind, you ended up in Japan as a Zen monk. So could you perhaps fill in the gaps there?
Well, yes. One of my favorite guitar players still is American, very famous musician and composer called Steve Vai. You know, he's won 50 Grammys at least. Uh, so lots of. He's very popular. Has sold millions and millions of records. Played in very famous rock bands. But in his music, there was an element of spirituality there in the titles of the songs, sometimes in the lyrics of the songs, and also in his playing. This is something that nobody could explain to me when I was playing the guitar because, everybody can hear that he plays in his own style and he plays very virtuoso style music. But I wasn't paying attention to that side that much. I was noticing that there's depth in his playing that very few others have. Very few others have. And I noticed this early on, but nobody could explain it to me. They would just say that, well, it's Steve Vai, that's the god of electric guitar. So, that's what gods do. But it wasn't until many years later that I figured out that, he started meditating when he was 20 years old or 20 years old or something. So he was actually a long time meditator already in the early 90s when he published his first solo albums that became very, very famous. I didn't realize until I had gone to Japan. I studied with Terayama Roshi, Zen calligraphy and Zen arts, Zen martial arts, until I realized what I had been looking for in judo, in martial arts, what I had been looking for in music, that truth, that deeper meaning. Only then, through Terayama Roshi, I realized that I had been looking for that Zen part.
I see.
Yeah, and then it all started making sense. Yeah.
So in practical terms, like how did you so you sold your music studio, didn't you?
Yeah.
And did that help you raise some money to go and fly to Japan?
Well, I think I used the money from my music studio to, I didn't have like a big studio. It was like this was in 2002. So I had my own little music studio that was professional, but it was just a small music station. But I think I used that money for, paying rents and stuff like this. um, so I started practicing Zen Buddhism in the January of 2003 in Helsinki Zen Center, which belongs to the lineage of Philip Kapleau. Philip Kapleau trained in Japan after the Second World War, and he didn't actually become a Dharma heir because he didn't finish his training, but nevertheless he studied there for something like 10 years and then came to United States and then started his own center there. And my first teachers, the Swedish couple, they started studying with Philip Kapleau Roshi and then with his successor. So for the first year and a half, I studied with them. I went to retreats in Sweden, and they came over to Finland to give retreats, and in the city center and in the countryside. And then this lady of that couple, Kanya is her name, Kanya Roshi. She had been to Japan, and she had been to Sogenji, where I trained,
Yeah.
and she had also gone to meet Harada Tangen Roshi, who had a nickname of Old Buddha. So, she was kind to give me a recommendation letter to go to Sogenji to study with Shodo Harada Roshi. Yeah, so that's how it came about, and it was a lifelong dream of mine to go to Japan, and I had this dream that I would find this magical Zen master, and I would just practice with him and stay with him for 20 years until he said that, you're mature enough to become a teacher for yourself, so now you can go and teach. But this was really a dream of mine. I wanted to go to Japan and train in Zen and do martial arts and do calligraphy, all those three things together. And it worked out pretty well,
Mm.
but you know, um, so there's so many things I could spend the rest of the day. I could speak about Terayama Roshi and his lineage, and but one figure through one book that really impacted me strongly is a Japanese master of Zen, martial arts, and calligraphy called Tesshu. 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 Yamaoka Tesshu. Yamaoka Tesshu passed away in 1888. But I remember by accident finding a book, his biography, written by John Stevens. I bought it from a bookstore in Helsinki, and it just struck me like I had found the meaning of life. I have found the way of life that I had been looking for. So practicing these three arts, and also before I left for Japan, I was in this small antique store. There was an old Finnish couple selling Chinese antiques in a small shop in the center of Helsinki, and I used to go there, and they had a small shelf of books, and the husband said to me that, we just had a new batch of books today, so take a look. I would stay in their shop, and we would sip tea and have these talks, discussions, and then I found a book by Terayama Roshi there. A Zen Brushwork is the title of the book, and it was just published in, I think, 2002 or 3, and that was probably the first copy that ever entered the whole country in Finland. And I happened to pick it up, and from the first book I read that it's Tesshu's lineage, it's all the three arts combined, and I have to go and find this lineage holder, this master. So, but I was broke, I didn't have any money. I realized that it would be a bit problematic to, if you enter, I was told that if you enter Japan as a tourist with a tourist visa, then they don't like it if you try to change the status of the visa while you're staying there. So I wanted a cultural visa from the beginning. But then I met this Finnish-Japanese couple who lived in Japan, who helped me to do that. I helped them with some, I worked for them a little bit and so on. But they helped me, they paid my ticket and helped me over. And then the next month from my arrival, I met Terayama Roshi at Tesshu's home temple in Tokyo on the Memorial Day of Tesshu's, which is July 19th.
Mm.
Yeah.
That must have been something.
Well, I wasn't expecting less. So that was exactly what I went there to do.
Mm.
That was exactly what I was looking for and wanted to get. But it was at the same time pretty amazing because I connected with Teshu so deeply. And knowing that Terayama Roshi was the main lineage holder in the lineage, and meeting him first time in Teshu's home temple, which is another story how it happened, because in those days there was no Japanese internet it's not very easy to use, let's put it that way, at least for a foreigner. But in 2004 it was still much more difficult, and I just couldn't find the address of the temple until that very morning of Teshu's Memorial Day. So I found myself over to the temple, and I remember they were really kind to allow me to join those celebrations, because it's only for invitation only. So it's only for dignitaries, really distinguished, all kinds of martial art teachers and Zen masters and important political figures joining that event. But they still allowed me to join it, which is just, they might have as well told me that go away, go away, weird gaijin foreigner. So, but they allowed me to do that, and I remember the very first moment when the ceremony in the afternoon had ended, and the crowd was leaving the main hall, and I was just standing there. I wasn't standing like this. I was standing like this, listening, having like a respectful demeanor. And then out of that crowd, Terayama Roshi appeared. And I, of course, immediately recognized him because I had his book. And the second our eyes met, we both bowed at each other. It wasn't only me bowing to him, but the very moment when our eyes met, we both bowed. So it wasn't like I bowed and then he was, oh, there was somebody bowing to me. And then no, it didn't go like that. It was immediately. And then I didn't want to go, and it would have been intactful of me to go and talk with him, because he was one of the most respected people in the whole temple. It had 300-400 guests maybe, so I didn't want to be rude and go and talk with him. But I wanted to make sure that when he was leaving the temple, I wanted our energies to meet again. So I was waiting there at the entrance of the temple, and when he came out, I simply bowed to him again, and he was looking at me, and he was talking with his assistants who were with him, that clearly indicating that there's this one young man there. And then when I got to where I was staying, in a couple of days I made some phone calls. I knew that he was a professor of calligraphy teaching in universities. So I called the university and asked him if they could give me his phone number so that I could call him up, and they just gave it to me. Terayama Roshi, I remember him being kind of wondering that why did they give my number, because but maybe it was because I was a foreigner, so they just gave it. I don't know. But 3 weeks later, after Teshu's Memorial Day, I called him up, and he invited me to come to his home. And from the very first meeting, I had a how to say, excuse that I went there to interview him to a Finnish martial arts magazine. And I actually had a list of questions also. But, his wife invited me into the house, and we just started practicing together. He started teaching me right away. So there was I never took out the list of questions, and it was I didn't he passed away 3 years or so after that. Actually, 4 years. So I didn't get to be with him as much as I wanted, but it was very deep connection from the start, and I didn't even know it at the time. But during my stay in Japan, I was there for a year, and he invited me to come to his practice sessions, and I did many times. But I didn't even know that the way how he was relating to me and taking care of me, I kind of thought that, well, I felt the connection between him and myself, but I didn't know. I assumed that that's the way how he takes care of all his students and disciples. But it wasn't until years later, when he had already passed away, when I was told that no, he didn't treat others the way he treated you,
Mm.
because he invited me to private trainings. He invited me private training, meaning that there was only me and him and his wife. He never invited even his disciples who had been with him for 20 years. He didn't do this. Not to even mention beginners who had just joined the group. So just one indication how our connection was. Yeah, I miss him a lot. And he was wonderful because he had practiced so much and studied so many different traditions. He went to India for a couple of years in the 70s, and I know that he became friends with Tibetan Buddhist practitioners and lamas there.
Mhm.
So he had much wider understanding of practice than what Zen masters typically have. And often, Japanese Zen masters, especially of Rinzai style, which is, he was the main Dharma heir of Omori Sogen Roshi, who was very famous in Japan. And Terayama Roshi also was very, very famous. But though not at all known outside Japan. But so despite of his status, he was very casual. Very casual. He wasn't, often Japanese Zen masters are kind of macho, and they have that lower belly energy, lower belly force. And he had it also, but he was very soft and very casual, and but at the same time I never approached him like, you're so casual, so we are friends and let's high five. Sometimes people do that to me now that I'm a teacher, and it feels very off, because students should always remember that we can be friends with our teachers and masters, but never forget what's the main purpose of the connection. I never did with him, even though he was very casual and friendly.
Mm.
Yeah. But yeah, Terayama Roshi was my main Zen master, and he also asked me to teach afterwards. But then I stayed in Shodo Harada Roshi's Zen temple, Sogenji. His organization is known as One Drop Zen. They have many groups and centers all over the world. And I'm really grateful for that time, but I didn't really personally connect with Shodo Harada in that way. There was nothing wrong with it, absolutely nothing wrong with it, but I just never connected with him in that really deep personal way. And then I went to see the old Buddha, Harada Tangen.
Oh yeah.
He was, at the time, I think he was 82 years old, and he had been living in this small temple. Philip Kapleau, who I mentioned, he was like a monk brother to Harada Tangen when both were very young. so
right.
like in the early 50s.
Yeah.
And so I stayed in Tangen Roshi's temple for 10 days. And also with him, I connected very deeply. It was very brief, but I had a chance to talk with him at least 3 or 4 times in private. And not in the interview room, which also happened, like a formal Zen interview, but in the garden, when he was taking his afternoon break and just walking in the garden and looking around by himself, those kind of situations. I went over and with respect, and he welcomed me and we had a little conversations. So with Harada Tangen I spent 10 days. I think that he's the only Buddhist Mahasiddha who I have met in person, physically. There are other Buddhist Mahasiddhas alive, but he's the only one who I've met in person. So, meeting somebody who's that seasoned, 82, has practiced and had that lifestyle for decades and decades, plus having his Bhumis perfected. That's why being with him and getting transmission from him was like, it was like different world to me. And he gave me the so-called pointing out instructions in Zen way, when we were having a private interview. And he was asking me for my story and why I had come to Japan and to see him. And then I was telling him about my training and what I wanted to do. And he was just like chuckling. Aha, good, natural fight. You're having a natural fight. Good. And then all of a sudden he took his Zen master's wooden stick. They have this stick, I don't remember what it's called, and then he let out a very strong shout, just all of a sudden. And I had had that experience, like had heard Zen masters shout, and in private and in public occasions, Zen masters do that. They let out these powerful shouts at different moments, and so I wasn't expecting it, but it didn't. I wasn't like shocked, like what the heck did he shout? Nothing like this. So he let out his shout, and it just completely penetrated me, went completely through me. It was a loud shout from someone who's 82 and doesn't have strong muscles like young men do. So the whole temple, like I remember that it shook, the wooden temple. It's not that difficult to do that, to get a wooden structure to shake, but there was such depth in his energy, in his presence, that his shout has never left me. Still today, it hasn't left me. So that was extremely meaningful, but I didn't like the way how the temple was handled. I didn't really, and it's not his fault. It's I'm not. It's just that I had been in Sogenji for a while, and which was, I feel the food was better and it was better handled, and so I didn't feel like staying at Bukkokuchi at Tangen Harada's temple. So I went to Tokyo to Ichikukai, a dojo, a training hall called Ichikukai. Ichiku means 19. Kai means group. So 19 group, 19 group. And that dojo had been started in the late 1800s by Teshu student, Ogura sensei. So in the honor of Teshu, this temple had been founded and was still there. So I went there and I stayed there for a few months. And it was there where I learned rhythmical shouting practice. No, it was a temple that combined Zen, Buddhist, and Shinto practices. So they do this Shinto practice called misogi harai. Misogi is a general term for Shintoist purification practices, and they did one type of it, which contains loud rhythmical shouting. So that's where I first did it, rhythmical shouting, which we call dynamic concentration in Amrita Mandala. And then there were a couple of other places I went to Zen retreats and met different Roshis, but like I said, most impact, Zen masters who had most impact on me were Terayama Roshi and Tangen Roshi.
One thing that was very important to you was learning how to read the energies of calligraphy. I think this sort of learning the dynamic concentration and learning how to read energies has been pretty pivotal for you.
Yes, Terayama Roshi was the one who taught me. The thing with the Zen arts, what separates Zen arts from common arts is the energy. So, somebody who is awakened, just one awakening, like Eckhart Tolle, let's say, for example. People see and feel that there's something different in Eckhart Tolle compared to them. That's because of his one or two awakening experiences that he has had. So then if we think that we have somebody who's had a number of awakening experiences, plus have practiced meditation for a number of years, that person's energy is again different than that of most people's. And then if you think that the person who has done practice and had these awakenings paints or draws something, makes a sculpture of wood or clay or metal, does some kind of artwork, then because of his physical involvement, his or her energy will have stuck in the work of art, in that art piece. And if we compare that, even if somebody has been trained as a sculptor but doesn't have that energy, doesn't have that mind that is awakened, even though the sculpture can be technically perfect, it lacks the energy. This is the difference between normal arts and Zen arts. So Zen arts is all about energy and studying the energy from whether it's black ink calligraphy or, I make these very colorful, abstract, expressionistic paintings myself. I haven't done black ink calligraphy and painting in years. Doesn't mean that I won't go back to it, but so that's the main study really in Zen arts, the energy of it. Or if somebody sings or plays the guitar, again the same principle, like what I said about Steve Vai, meditator who is a virtuoso player, technically good. If you are sensing, you can sense that there is something more in here. It's not only fingers running fast, right? So yeah, this is the most basic in Terayama Roshi's lineage, this teaching. And his lineage started already in ancient China with a master called Wang Shi Tzu. W-A-N-G, Wang, X-I, Shi, Z-H-I, Tzu, Wang Shi Tzu. My Chinese is... Chinese people, please don't get offended.
Sounded good to me.
But there is this Chinese calligrapher saint where there's a story of him, which is that he had been brushing calligraphy on a piece of wood, and then he just threw the wood somewhere, and told his student to go and get a piece of wood and make it smooth on the surface so that he can write on it. And the student had started to sandpapering the surface because there was already writing on it by his master, and he sandpapered it, and the characters that just didn't go off, didn't disappear, although he was sandpapering it like heck, and they just wouldn't disappear. And he had been there for 1 or 2 hours, and the characters just don't go away. And he had gone to the master and showed him that these characters don't disappear. I don't know what's wrong. And Wang Shiche started laughing because, his energy has penetrated so deep into the wood that they just didn't come off. And that's where the name of the tradition comes. It's in Japanese, it's Jubokudo, Juboku, which means penetrating the wood, way of penetrating the wood. So it's the intention, it's the energy that penetrates the wood or penetrates the paper or penetrates the sculpture. So yeah, it's an ancient tradition.
So how long altogether were you in Japan?
1 year and 1 week.
I see.
Not that long. But
So
yeah.
Was it at the end of that year that you had this shift of heart? You had explored Zen, and it was what you wanted to dedicate your life to. But where did this change happen for you?
No, the change happened. What happened was that I wanted to stay there, and I wanted to study with. I told Roshi, Terayama Roshi, that I wanted to stay there and study with him. I told him that I didn't want to study with others, just you. And he told me that he would have gladly taken me in to live in his home, taken me as a home student, but his son was ill with stomach cancer. So his son, already adult son, he was staying at home, and then he also passed away. But that's why he couldn't take me to his home. And I just couldn't find... the training in Ichikukai Dojo was okay, but it was very macho, and people weren't that nice. It was very, very masculine in a bad way. So I didn't want to be there for longer than 2-3 months, and I just didn't find a place where I wanted to be. So that's why I returned to Finland. And I kept practicing. It was a really big shock for me. This was when I was something like 26 years old when I came back, because I had such a deep wish to stay and train in Japan for 20 years, or maybe stay there for the rest of my life. I remember past lives being in Japan, so that's why I have such a deep, such a positive connection with the country and the people. But yeah, it just didn't work out, and I had to come back to Finland, and I kept practicing Zen for 1 more year, and I stayed in touch with Terayama Roshi through telephone and mails. I sent my calligraphies for him to evaluate, and he would send them back and have his comments on them, giving suggestions. And we did that until very soon, near when he passed away. He also died of stomach cancer in 2007. So yeah, I kept practicing Zen for about a year after I came back to Finland. But then in the summer of 2006, I had a overheating of my body, because Rinzai Zen, there's lots of pushing there. You use concentration in a very strong and forceful way, and my body just couldn't deal with it anymore. So I had this period that summer when I kept sweating for 2 days non-stop, profusely. And I knew that this was a sign that I shouldn't continue practicing like this. And this is what led me first to, I had like eye patches like this, and I just had to force myself to open up my view to different types of practice. And this led me to meet, I had actually met Amma, the hugging saint, already in 2003 in Finland. But I met her second time in 2006 in the autumn. By that time I had already met my first wife, and we were together, and she was a follower of Amma's. So I went and met Amma the second time, and then that same autumn, Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi was published in Finnish. So that's how I found out about Kriya Yoga, this branch of Hindu Tantric yoga. And then in December of 2006, I got my first initiation and learned practices in, Yogananda is part of that lineage, but I went to Hamburg, Germany to receive my first initiation.
I see. So 2003 you met Amma, but I'm guessing you were Zen man.
Well, no, I didn't really meeting her the first time and receiving her darshan the first time, 2003. I noticed that there was some effect on me, but I didn't really recognize it. I didn't have the sensitivity to recognize, and I wasn't, because I had just found Zen earlier that year, so I wasn't even thinking of other options. So I didn't have the thought of following her or needing to try other methods. Yeah, but in 2006 I was already. I remember my first wife, or then girlfriend. She was very excited about Ammachi, and she was very happy that I also went to see Amma with her, and I received mantra from her that autumn in a program in Helsinki. And I said that mantra for a couple of months maybe, but then I realized that there was this Kriya Yoga event in Germany, so I had to go. Yeah, and I have met Amma many times over the years. I've gone to her ashram in southern India twice, stayed there for a few months or so, and Amma has been like a lovely support for me. Also a source of study, but support. She has supported me in different ways. Didn't accept everything that I asked her or suggested to her. I've discussed with her in person there when you go and hug her or she hugs you. I've had short discussions. But yeah, I think that Ammachi is an outstanding master, really wonderful kind in history, in all of history, but also outstanding master in terms of attainments. So I think that she has attained full light body. Yeah.
So all of this came at quite an opportune moment for you, because you had put everything into your Zen meditation, it sounded like, for at least the last couple of years. And with this body heating, it was just a signal to you, oh, okay, I've been doing this for so long now. There was a little bit of fear, was there? And so this is what you're saying, it opened the blinkers that you had to explore outside of this box that you'd put yourself in.
Well, fear, I wouldn't say fear, but I was very, very anxious that, I already had a plan. I had a plan, but it came crumbling down because my plan didn't work out. There was no external circumstances to support it. So And then there was the overheating of my body, which told me that, okay, enough of this. Now find something else. You need to find something else. And I'm glad I did. It was painful at first because I had a plan. So to totally forget that plan was painful at first, but then I felt that power of loving devotion, bhakti.
Mm.
And this was like a new realm to me. I've been practicing like a samurai for 4 years, and I had been a samurai all my life. In judo, practicing 6, 7 times a week, having to struggle through my life, being emotionally neglected from my childhood to youth, and so lots of struggles, lots of fights I had, and then to find a spiritual teaching and practices where you could just pray to Babaji or pray to the lineage masters and say it from your heart with love, and then be flooded with incredible blissful energy and blessings.
Mm.
I didn't have that in Zen, and I remember, in Zen Buddhism, I think they have the highest work ethic in that tradition, because nobody sits as much as Zen Buddhists do. It is questionable if all that sitting is that useful, because even if you're sitting, you might not be in the recognition of your basic nature, awakened nature. So that's questionable, but nevertheless they have a high work ethic. But I remember when I learned Kriya Yoga from lineage holder Paramahamsa
Mm.
Pragyanananda, and I practiced like 20-30 minutes of practice, because it had been so short time when I was still practicing Zen and doing Zen retreats. I remember that after a week-long Zen retreat, week of sitting, week of not sleeping much, just practicing heavy duty practice, I felt the same as after 30 minutes of Kriya Yoga. So that was very important discovery, because I had put all my faith to Zen, and I really took the word when the tradition says that this is like an authentic enlightenment lineage starting from Shakyamuni Buddha and even the Buddhas before Shakyamuni. So this is an authentic lineage from one generation to the next for many generations, and it's a time-tested method. But I became disillusioned of all of that basic, I would say, propaganda, which is taken totally as a belief. This what is said of all traditions. So in the end, it was very painful to having to forget my initial plan, but it was a true gift to then realize that, well, it just actually doesn't work like it's supposed to work. And during the last 15 years, when I've been a teacher, so many people have come to me from Zen Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism or many established traditions, telling me exactly the same, that they did this practice for a number of years with full devotion and dedication, and they just didn't get the benefits that are supposed to come about. So, yeah.
So how did it go from there to you discovered Sivakami? Was this a similar period?
Yeah, um, so I learned Kriya Yoga first time in December of 2006, and then I went to a couple of Kriya Yoga programs in Pragyanananda's lineage the following year, and I also went to India the first time to celebrate his master Hariharananda and his centenary celebrations. But although he had passed away like 5 years before, but there were nevertheless his centenary celebrations there, and I went to India and I met. There was many swamis and yogis and saints and sages there joining that festival, which was wonderful to see these people. And then it was in the late summer of 2007, because of the training I had done with Terayama Roshi. I had sensitivity of energy, and I had basic understanding of what is dirty energy and what is pure energy. I had also, by the way, studied Reiki, Shiatsu and Reiki. I did Shiatsu professionally during those years for a couple of years. But I was back in Finland in the late summer of 2007, and I was Googling something about Babaji and these Siddhas, this Siddha tradition, when I stumbled upon Sivakami's website. And I remember opening that first page, and the energy came over me, and I knew that I had enough understanding and sensitivity that I instantly realized that, okay, this is very important, and this is a very pure lineage. So that's how I met with Sivakami. And for the next 3 years, until she passed away, she never allowed anyone to go meet her in person. She didn't allow it. So she left like a half a dozen or so teachers that she asked to teach and authorized to teach, including myself. But she didn't want to have the whole hassle with students. And I remember asking her that, why don't you, I would have gone in immediately if she would have allowed it. She was living in Hawaii that time. She was American, and she was originally from Oregon. And by the time when I got in touch with her, she was retired. She had been a kennelist, breeding and raising dogs, and she was a grandmother and married woman. And then they moved from Oregon to Hawaii for the remaining 10 years of her life for retirement. And it was during the retirement when she did all this work through the website and giving empowerments from distance, and also passing teachings in accordance to the level of advancement and understanding of students. And during those 3 years, when I was in touch with her, we changed emails for 600 pages. I have those 600 pages on my computer. Maybe I will release some of them at some point, but 600 pages. And, she'd been practicing meditation since mid-70s. And she had, I was just talking about Sivakami on the last retreat. And she had met with many spiritual teachers in person who were visiting United States, and she was first initiated by one of Yogananda's direct students, Swami Bhaktananda. But then she, in the early 80s, she connected with non-physical masters. And Babaji was the first one. In 1981 or 82, she had a very meaningful experience with Babaji. And then she was visited and given teachings by so many non-physical masters. And then in the early 90s, she had her first contact with Tirumular. Tirumular is a southern Indian name, which means Holy Shepherd. And Tirumular is, together with Agastya, probably the most famous spiritual guru in southern India. And so over the years she got in touch with these non-physical masters and received many teachings from them, but also from many others, from all kinds of traditions. She also refused from some teachers from some traditions because she didn't feel that the energy was right. But that's who she was. And then in 2007, when she was already retired, did her practice and leading sessions locally for a long time. I got in touch with her, and it was very meaningful and deep connection with her. So together with Terayama Roshi, I count Sivakami as my two main teachers, heart teachers or heart gurus. Yeah. And what was important with Sivakami is that by the time we got in touch, I had already started communicating with non-physical masters. So she taught me many things and she gave me many teachings, but I would say that that was the most important, how she helped me to understand my connection with non-physical Mahasiddhas or gurus, and to understand that connection better. Yeah.
How did you discover it yourself before you came across Sivakami? So I know when you started Kriya Yoga, Babaji was the starting figure for you, wasn't he? And you would keep repeating his mantra over and over. And was it in some way through that you realized that you have a deeper connection with him?
Yes. I remember there's a sentence in Yogananda's book, his autobiography, where he says that something along the lines that, if you call Babaji's name even once, he's immediately there, or his blessings are there. So I read that sentence and didn't let go of Babaji's name for 2 years. And my name, my spiritual name, Amrita Baba, Sivakami gave me the name Baba Nanda because of my connection with Babaji. Yeah. I had been practicing Babaji's Guru Yoga for several months, having read it from Yogananda's book, and there simply was one moment when, I was practicing a lot. This was all during my so-called retreat years. So from the first day when I started practicing Zen for 8 years and 10 months, I was doing sitting practices for 8 hours or more every day. And I changed from Zen to Kriya Yoga, but I still kept the same practice routine. So I simply changed practices, but kept my retreat going. So yeah, I had been practicing for a number of months with Babaji, and then there simply was one session where I realized that it's not only like energy coming to me, some vaguish energy. It was very strong from the beginning, but I realized that, well, it's a person in front of me. And just like we are sitting in front of each other, we can have a discussion. So I opened my mouth and asked questions, and there was like a clearly audible reply. That's how it started.
Oh,
yeah.
All of a sudden, you have this teacher who can help you along this path and help you deepen these connections with these non-physical masters.
Yeah, it was really important relationship I had with Sivakami, because she was so much more experienced than I was, and she had very similar connection like myself. with many of these non-physical masters, so it was a perfect fit for me. Even though when she didn't allow me to physically meet her, but that was her choice. So, but I still got a lot out of it, and I don't think there are, many people have mystical inclinations and mystical abilities, to perceive to different realms and, be in touch with the deceased or something like this. But it is a very special type of spiritual practice to stay in touch with non-physical gurus or Mahasiddhas, fully enlightened masters. But it is also a very special karma one needs to have when it becomes like a how do you say, how do you define it, like a real actual communication.
Mm.
So anybody can get the blessings, and this has been said over centuries by many masters that, please do ask for the blessings of Jesus or Babaji or Krishna or whoever, because you will immediately receive it. But then it requires the requirement for having an exchange. It's different. You need to have like a karmic reason for that.
Mm.
Yeah.
So was this Sivakami's teachings that led you to start your teaching? So she gave you permission to teach, and that's roughly 2008.
Yes. Wait a second. So I was leading like a sessions in different yoga schools, and I was asked to come and teach different yoga groups in different parts of the country. My first wife's mother was like a active in local yoga scene in a rural place, and they asked me to come. So I would give like a session here and there. And there was also a group of friends who asked me to teach Zen calligraphy to them. So I went to another town in Finland, in eastern Finland, for 3 years every month for a weekend to teach. So this is something that I did before when I started teaching full time. But when I started teaching full time, people asked me, my friends who knew me, and also my masters asked me. And then I don't remember exactly when Sivakami told me to continue her lineage, but it was around that time. Yeah.
So how are these teachings? How are you able to? Because I'm getting from you, perhaps it wasn't a full-blown conversation, as it were, but you received hints. But these were audible hints within your experience. Perhaps you
Okay.
can talk us through it a
So
little.
with non-physical masters.
Mm.
Yeah, so that communication, in my experience, can happen in a couple of ways. It can be like a telepathic conversation that we are having, or it can be thought transference from them. You suddenly know something and it's an answer to your question, or something that you didn't think before, and but it fits somewhere what you're doing. Um, yeah, so in those two ways, it can be. I'm not a very visual person, but I've also had like seen them in my inner eye, seeing them with me, and then. But there has been, mostly it's been like a small practice tips and small instructions, short, concise, pithy instructions. But I have also had like a long conversations. Some of these conversations I've written down as I'm having them. I have quite a bit of that stuff on my computer. Hasn't been released ever, but of course the main topic of my exchange with my masters has been to put together this method
Mm.
that is compact, concise, easy to learn, but hasn't compromised the benefits. Putting together a method that leads to full enlightenment in a single lifetime has been the most important topic of between myself and my masters.
Mm.
So yeah, getting instructions, direct instructions, or of course teachings and empowerments. There are so many empowerments I've received during since the beginning. I mean, hundreds of empowerments, hundreds, maybe like 400 or something. And I'm not counting all the Guru Yoga transmissions, like receiving blessings, but empowerments of different deities for different mantras and so on. Hundreds of them. And I have all of them written down in my diaries. But yeah, putting together a method like Amrita Mandala, it has required my full attention. It still requires my full attention. So I couldn't have done this. That was the reason why when I began teaching, why I chose to start teaching, because I realized that if I postponed starting teaching for later, maybe 15 or 20 years later when I'm completely done myself, I just didn't have the luxury of having that extra time, because if I had started teaching, for example, now 15 years later, I wouldn't know you. I wouldn't have got in touch with so many people who I worked with and taught over the years, who received so many benefits, and there wouldn't be those 21 people who have attained emptiness of all phenomena, which is second half of full enlightenment. So I understood back in 2008 that I have to start doing this publicly right away. And I understood that, I was very inexperienced experientially, both socially, but also practice-wise. I didn't have even nearly as much experience spiritually than I have now, but I still had to get the ball rolling. So that's what I did.
Mm. There's been quite a lot of Tertöns and masters from the past who did complete their practice and then they began teaching, but this just wasn't your path. It was much more beneficial for you in this lifetime to begin the teachings. And back in 2008, this is still a few years before your first awakening even.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I just had to get it started and to get going. Because one main challenge in my work, if I was born a Tibetan living in Tibet, I would be surrounded by a Buddhist culture.
Mm.
So I would have been probably recognized as a Tulku, probably as a Tertön very early on, because of the experience that I was having, because of the visions I was having, because of the things that I just came to know. So it would have been so much easier. I just moved to Slovenia from Finland, but I've been living in Finland for until last month. So it's a completely different kind of culture. There are no lamas, no rinpoches, no senseis, no roshis. And I don't think it would have been much different if I had lived in mainland Europe. But my point is that I felt that I have to start doing this, knowing that I was so unripe in many ways, but also knowing that my heart's in it. I'm sincere. I'm not gonna fool myself. I'm not gonna fool anybody else. So as long as I stay sincere and honest and have the connection and transmit the blessings that I have received, I thought that if I keep those couple of things in check, I'll be fine. And I haven't committed any serious mistakes, and didn't steal anybody's money, and didn't have any of these scandalous events. But the main challenge in my work, which remains today, is that this is like a habit Christian culture. Do you understand that habitually Christian? So it's not like a practicing Christian culture, but these Christian beliefs are there. And at the same time, it might be different in Slovenia actually, but and probably is a little bit, but in Finland and in most countries, most people don't have a concept for spiritual practice. They only have a concept for spiritual or religious belief. And so it would have been completely different to take rebirth amidst of lamas and rinpoches and you know these masters who you know from past life, and everything would have been so much easier. But this support is not there with Amrita Mandala, with my present work, and it is also very difficult to reach people, even though everything about our mission is completely open. You can receive most of the practices and teachings from books, and it's all been laid out and explained in detail. But being a mystic, not having a lineage, has been very difficult, because if you don't have a letter of approval from some His Holiness, some High Lama, people don't even want to look into it. But this is actually a feature of religion. So people have very religious mindset, even among practitioners of yoga and meditation. But it's just how it is. I'll keep doing what I do. And some of my students and friends support that mission.
So these next few years leading up to awakening, you had your initial awakening for yourself, this thing you'd been searching for yourself since 2002 or so. So for you, this is a 9-10 year journey of intense meditation to get to this initial awakening.
Oh, that was also a moment of major disillusionment. That point, when I had my first awakening experience, started the process that I'm now bringing to finish. Understanding which practice and what types of practices, what methods lead to what, and where they do not lead. So I had been practicing Zen for 4 years, and then Hindu Tantra in the form of Kriya Yoga from many different lineages. I learned from many lineages, not only from Pragyananda and Sivakami, but many different ones. Went to India a number of times to meet different swamis, yogis, and they taught me and all that. But still, I didn't have an awakening experience. And my experience is actually, I would say, pretty, if not identical, similar to Shakyamuni Buddha's, because Shakyamuni Buddha was practicing jhanas, meditative absorptions, and he became disillusioned that this is not going anywhere. There are these meditative states that are doing something in my system, but when I stop meditating, my ordinary habits come back. And I had the same problem with Kriya Yoga. So I think it was 11th of November in 2011, I had my first awakening experience through a mantra that I had received. Sivakami was, by then already, she passed away a year before, in 2010 in November. And then year later, her senior most disciple, who is Devamani from India, we were in email correspondence, and I told her about my problem, that I hadn't had like a permanent shift. So when I stop meditating, it all keeps coming back as it was before the meditation. And she simply had an idea that she had received this mantra for a deity called Muruga. Muruga is in Shaivism, in Shiva tradition, is a son of Shiva. So there is Shiva and there is Shakti or Parvati, father and mother, and then there are two sons, Ganesha, the elephant-headed deity, and then Muruga, who is the lord of yogis. And so Devamani gave me this Muruga mantra, and I knew before I practiced it, I knew that this Shakti, the energy of that deity, this mantra would fix my problem. I knew before I started practicing it. So I sat down, said the mantra a few times, and pop, uh, there was a shift. And I immediately knew that this was exactly what I had been looking for. So that's how it happened. Yeah.
And it was quite a rich shift for you.
Yeah. I had been practicing so much. In Buddhist tradition, there is, or in some Buddhist traditions, there is so-called dry insight or dry awakenings separated from wet insight or wet awakenings. So dry means that if you haven't done practices before, it's kind of a awakening that happens in a body-mind that is unprepared with practice. It has an impact, a permanent impact, but it doesn't have so much muscle behind it, figuratively speaking, than if you have practiced before. So when you have prepared the ground, or the ground is wet, your body mind is prepared, then even one awakening experience can kind of how would I say that the scope of it is bigger somehow. And I have actually stories about this. I remember when I was in Sogenji, and one of the monks there, in Zen temples you usually start practicing concentration practices, calm abiding, shamatha meditation. And so I remember being told of this Zen monk there who had some time before I came, had this major, like really, really big kensho, really big awakening experience, and I had no clue. I wanted that, but I had no personal experience what it was. But I was told that, the monk had such a big kensho that it impacted the whole monastic community for 3 months. And I perfectly understand how it would be possible. The thing is that in monastic community of 20 or 25 members, you are very energetically very close knit, very close, and you practice a lot meditating with those people. So you are so well connected, very strong nadi connections between people. And then when everybody has such a wet ground, somebody has a opening, it's a wet insight, meaning like a strong opening, big opening, and it impacts everybody. That's how it works. That's the mechanism of it. And yeah, my first awakening was also wet, so I was enjoying it thoroughly for about year and 2-3 months until the second awakening I had.
So this is your first Bhumi that you popped a hole through.
Yeah.
You had this initial stabilizing insight. So when we're talking about awakening, there's a stabilizing that happens. That this is what the Buddha was looking for. He was looking for a practice which affects him permanently, rather than just a state that you get into and then you get up off your meditation cushion and you were as you were before. This is an awakening where you walk away into ordinary life and you still notice a shift in your perception of awareness.
Definitely. It's like if we speak in terms of duality and non-duality. Dualistic positioning is created by this sense of me, I, or self. So you simply think and conceptualize in terms of me or self and other. But when the deconstruction or the crumbling of that whole habitual mechanism starts when that first shift happens. And what is the insight is that how our thinking and perceiving changes is that, and this is of course the first awakening. This is just the first one. So there's so many afterwards. There's so much to deepen afterwards. So much to discover. So this is just the first bit, first step in a long stairway. But it is very significant because that compulsive habit of thinking in terms of me and my sadness, my misery, my problems, my endless list of things in relation to you and them and others, this constant friction, that is no longer there in the same way it was. So it's very significant. It's an immense relief.
So how did it impact you personally in that year and a bit period?
Well, I had already been practicing for so many years before that. So there was an impact, but it wasn't like, oh, my life is so different now. No. It was this state was already familiar to me too. But it's just that the notion of me or I didn't come back the same way it had before that. So that was significant. It kind of that sense of being without this notion of me or self just didn't come back the same way. It wasn't like some completely new realm or dimension open to me, not like that. It was simply that the notion of me or I was not the same as it was before. And that's the relief. That's the importance of it.
I'm wondering, from your perspective then, how did you sort of see it in terms of a path? You've had this first awakening, and then does enlightenment still seem miles off? Or
This is something that I studied over the years seeing Amma, because I intuited that her presence was so different from the Zen masters who I had met, many yoga teachers and different swamis and so on who I had met. Her presence was so different. I was never able to find like a weak spot or a blind spot. In martial arts there's a concept called suki, which means opening. That if someone is on guard, there might be some fear, and that fear creates an opening where somebody can find that opening and attack through that opening. Amma don't have an opening. I had seen so many martial artists and Zen masters and all these folks that I knew that she doesn't have an opening, and radiating immense blessings around the clock. You get tired just sitting there for a few hours and you feel exhausted, but she's there on stage hugging thousands of people. So amazing. But yeah, I because of her and because of my Guru Yoga practice, practicing hours and hours daily with Babaji and Tirumular, some other masters of the Nath lineage, Agastya, Bogarnath, I knew that there's still quite a bit of distance between my energy and my presence to theirs. But I didn't have a map, and that was my something that I started contemplating. That, well, I had my first awakening, and then a bit over a year later, second opening, and then few months after the second one, I had a third one. And by then I was already connecting it in my head, logically thinking that I'm not with each awakening, I'm not like a awakening to completely new, different worlds or realms or experiences, but that my experience or recognition of the awakened state simply gets more muscle under it, or gets richer, gets deeper. It doesn't get more expansive, like bigger. No, not like that. But you just find the awakenedness of my mind and energy just becomes more comprehensive with each of these steps. And so I was already contemplating that, well, how does it work? Like these masters who I practice Guru Yoga, I see it in Amma, I felt it in Harada Tangen, the old Buddha. You know, how am I getting from here to there? How does it all work? What's the path? What's the journey? How many awakenings I need to have to get to where they are? And that's when I was practicing one day Guru Yoga with Tirumular, the South Indian Shaiva master, and he gave me a tip. I was meditating, right? And he simply gave a tip. I felt his presence, and I felt him coming near me, and he pointed out that take a look at these small centers inside your head. Just perceive that there's 6 of them on top of each other. And I looked at the centers and immediately saw that 3 of them were kind of open, and the next 3 weren't. And then he pointed out that, you know, in Kriya Yoga you already get to know the chakras, the centers above your head and below your body. So I already knew of those, and this is very central part also in Sivakami's teachings, the chakra pillars, Bhumi pillars. And he pointed out that, well, you know, these awakenings come in a sequence, and it follows this order. So now you've had 3, and there's 3 more to go with these centers that are still inside the body, inside the head. And then it continues the chakras that are on top of each other in the space above the head. So he simply pointed out that it goes in an order. So just keep practicing and you will see that this happens. So it was Tirumular who taught me the 13 Bhumi model. 13 to help it for the listeners, that it's a model that follows these 13 major awakenings, where you can feel and verify that these awakenings change the state of your chakras, energy centers in your energy body. That there are changes, shifts taking place there, and that they are permanent shift, not only like a momentary opening, but that they actually, awakening experience always leaves a permanent mark. So, yeah.
And this is a very useful model for the students, because we can gradually begin to become aware of our own subtle energy body, these energy centers. And I know for me it took a long time, but as you progress through the stages, there's these openings that happen. You become a little bit clearer and can see these things more clearly. But it's quite a long path to go. So learning where you're clearing your karma and how things are opening up for you gives you some place, some place on this path map where you know that you are.
That's the thing, that's the problem I have with path maps. You know, path map is a concept in Buddhism, which means that path map is a map that ties your spiritual or meditative experience with a model that explains how the whole journey, how you go through the whole journey from unawakened state through intermediary states to fully enlightened state. So that's a path map. And in Buddhism there are many, lots of them. Buddhism has so many different traditions and schools, so over the time they have developed many of these. But the problem with most of these is that they are merely verbal. They are merely descriptions, verbal descriptions and definitions. But the difference and the value in the 13 Bhumi model, which is, by the way, the Bhumis are already discussed in ancient Veda scriptures. Rig Veda is at least 10,000 years old. In Mahayana Buddhism there are sutras. What is it? Something like Dasha Bhumi Sutra. So Sutra of the 10 Bhumis, Dasha Bhumi, that discusses 10 Bhumis, which are the same first 10, but in 13 Bhumi model you have 3 more. But the 10 are the journey from unawakened to fully awakened or fully enlightened. So I find that it is, so many people struggle with this because they are putting so much time and so much love and so much effort into their practice. And they want to attain full enlightenment. They want to attain full liberation of all this selfing and all these traumas, all these burdens. But then they don't know, where am I on the map? Am I even going to the right direction? Having no clue where they are. That's the problem I have with most path maps, because they can't really answer that question clearly. But 13 Bhumis, I've spoken to 2 different Buddhist scholars who are also teachers of Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana, Tantric Buddhism, and I've asked them that if they knew any lineage or tradition or a Lama who teaches and uses the 13 Bhumis or the 10 Bhumis the way how it works, energetical model. And they both answered right away that no, there's nobody who does that. But I'm absolutely certain, because Bhumis are these Bhumi openings and Bhumi perfections, Bhumi events. So these are the way how the subtle bodies of all people are built. No matter if you are Frank from London or Fritz from Germany, if you are Ramana Maharishi from Arunachala, if you are Eckhart Tolle from United States, or if you are Padmasambhava from ancient India, whoever you are, man, woman, or whatever you identify as, you have the same subtle body. You have the same chakras. And when you start having awakening experiences, whether if they come to you spontaneously, like to Eckhart Tolle, for example, or if you start having awakening experiences because you practice something, they come in an order. No matter who you are, whether Zen Buddhist, Advaita Vedantist, Chokchen, Mahamudra, Tantra, Christian contemplative prayer, they come in an order. And this is something that it was known in ancient times. I'm not saying that it was known widely, but because there are these scriptures about Bhumis, is what makes me certain that this knowledge was known at some point. and we are simply reviving it. And I have done Bhumi analysis, energy reading in common terms to thousands of people. I don't know how many thousand, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 people, but also hundreds of different types of spiritual teachers or spiritual influencers. So I've tested and verified that that's exactly how it works. Yeah, so it is a very handy meter, like a measuring system, and it is an immense relief to. There are many people who come to study with me who have practiced meditation in different traditions for many years, like yourself, for example, or many people in UK and Ireland who or elsewhere who have practiced for 20 years, 30 years, and they don't have a clear picture and understanding how it works and where they are. So 13 Bhumi model answers that question, but it requires developing some sensitivity. But this can be developed by anybody. The thing is that when a child learns to ride a bike, she or he doesn't learn it on the first session, not second session or third session either. So it takes time to learn. It's same thing with internal yoga that we're talking about, that nobody, well, unless you have done perhaps some energy healing or like Reiki, or so you have some sensitivity, but to master the 13 Bhumis so that you in your own experience, so that you can read your own energy or read anybody's energy very easily, it takes effort and dedication to learn. But anybody can learn it, because everybody has those centers and everybody has those energies. So, yeah.
There was also Garchen Rinpoche, wasn't there, who talked about working through Bhumis. Do you think he had some idea of that there's this process that you're working through?
Clearly. Garchen Rinpoche, I have two of his quotes in my third book, Buddhas Among Us. All of these books are freely available from our website. But there are two quotes from Garchen Rinpoche in that book. One of them is that where he says that I have finished my purification and therefore I'm ready to die. And the second quote is, I don't remember if it's from his book or from his lecture, but he says that, you can find the exact quote of course, but he says that Bhumis don't mean anything else except you becoming more and more familiar with the natural state, which is how it is. There is nothing else. When we talk about spiritual path, and I'm not talking about spirituality as meeting UFOs or channeling some angels. I'm talking about like a down-to-earth Dharma, meaning that Dharma is the teaching of reality itself, that has the purpose of relieving us from existential suffering and pain and emotional burdens or traumas. That's the definition of traditional yoga and the so-called Dharma. So if we speak of spirituality and any spiritual path with that definition, it cannot mean anything else. Whether we are talking about Bhumis or if we are talking about speaking of different stages of awakening with different terms, Kensho, Satori, they have their own terminology in Pure Land Buddhism, in Tibetan, doesn't matter. It always means gradual familiarization of oneself as fully enlightened being. There are no other definitions possible. So, we all have enlightened nature, awakened nature already in us. And the practice and the path is simply becoming more and more familiar with it, so that there is no dualistic notion of self and other, and also no psychic injury or trauma in the system anymore. That's it. There is nothing else to spirituality.
So from a student's point of view, I come into this thinking it's that there's some certain sense of outrageousness, perhaps, that there's this teacher who says he can be in communication with non-physical masters and these types of things. So I come into this skeptically, as perhaps anyone should, but with an open mind and trying the teachings, not necessarily understanding some of the mystical aspects of Tantra, yet as I progress through the path, I'm seeing this gradual clearing in my own experience of the world, and it goes how the path says it goes. You begin to relate them to these centers in the head and above the head, and you notice this clearing going on. And I point in this direction because this is just the sense of how the clearing seems to occur. But then gradually you have this experience where you don't really associate with a self. The inside and the outside is not two separate things anymore. And this is a gradual familiarization with this experience as I've progressed through the path. So I experienced that.
Well, regarding that skepticism, it is always necessary. But if you're cynical, that's a problem. And I think that cynicism comes from traces of religion. So don't, whoever you are, don't bring religious belief or religious ideas into this. This is not a matter of belief. This is a matter of what works or doesn't work. And that doesn't require believing anything. This is something that Shakyamuni Buddha said, that, he had many students and many came to test him. And one important point he made was that do not believe me. Try and see for yourself. But nevertheless, exactly believing or not believing is exactly what most Buddhists do. So I don't know what to do about it. If you have that kind of religious habit, fine. It's not a problem to me, but it's a problem to you, because it limits your experience. What is religious beliefs based on? It's based on a notion of self, me, and whatever stuff that self, me or I believes. So it's good to listen what the masters have said. But people have very hard time doing exactly that. And what I've often sometimes seen in my work as a teacher, is that people believe or have the belief that they are doing what the masters are saying, but there's always like a coping strategy or some extra ideation that they are not actually questioning enough, that there is some belief there. There was something that you said, I already forgot the second half of what you said. So one thing I find really strange, it's the lack of pragmatism and lack of openness in basically all forms and teachings of spirituality. I don't like that at all. I don't like lack of openness, and I don't like secrecy. I have a complete dislike for stuff like that, and I also have dislike for how to say, reserving teachings, like keeping teachings to a small number of people. But also I've had so many difficult experiences with all kinds of people who want to revolutionize everything about everything.
Mm.
So because of that, I've also started to understand during the last several years why in traditional tantric lineages, esoteric lineages, for example, they don't just give all teachings to anybody who asks. Students need to have right attitude, and they need to be sincere and honest. These preliminaries, these prerequisites have to be met, because if a person doesn't have solid ethical behavior and lacks sincerity, you can't teach a person like that. I mean, it doesn't only apply to the relationship between the teacher and student, but it applies all other types of relationships, isn't it? If somebody is completely wild all the time, you can't really trust such a person. So I've often used this comparison that when we go to school, we learn to read and write and maths and geography and all these things step by step. If we didn't learn, if our children didn't learn all that stuff in school, and at the end of the year we found out that, wait a second, my daughter has been going to school for a year and she doesn't even know the alphabet yet, we would immediately question that. Immediately. Any parent would do that. But this very question is almost entirely absent in the spiritual culture among practitioners. They just keep practicing, doing something in their practice, being taught by lineage holders and precious lineages that started 10,000 years ago in some sacred mountain.
Mm.
But people are afraid or do not have the wits to ask, where is this leading? And am I having the, am I having the signs of successful practice or not? Successful practice, a sign of successful practice is to have awakening experiences. And that is it. That's the main sign. But most people are afraid to ask because it's actually an interesting thing. Another thing in Buddhas Among Us in the book is that I've collected quotes from many historical masters, from Shakyamuni Buddha, from Padmasambhava, from many Dzogchen masters, many others who openly say that I have attained enlightenment. It is no longer a mystery to me at all. They have openly stated that. And yet, if you go and ask from your local meditation or Dharma center, you ask, how does awakening work, and can you tell me about enlightenment and how it can be reached and how does it all work? They will look at you like you were a weirdo, or they laugh at you. Oh, silly guy asking crazy questions, But this stating such things has been, these statements have been made by the greatest masters. And it is only like a feature of religiousness that this is not practiced.
Mm.
Again, if we compare spiritual culture and spiritual traditions and methods with secular arts and sciences, it is no wonder why people want nothing to do with spirituality, because it's belief-based woo-woo. It's complete, there's so much nonsense in there that no wonder why people rather believe in science and believe in society and law and order instead of this crap. It's not that much better than the medieval religions. Honestly, it's not that much better. But this needs to change, because if it is not changed, I don't know if there is much hope for humanity. So, yeah.
I was thinking about my mindset as I came to Amrita Mandala was I'd been going for quite a few years and see steady progress. Then, as in life, shit hits the fan and things went down, and I could see that there was no base to this practice. It sort of shocked me, and I thought in my mind, well, is my practice actually working? So it made me genuinely evaluate where my practice was at, and sort of this steady progress. I draw a line, and then I see I think, well, in a few decades I'm going to die. I'm not going to get anywhere near enlightenment. And it was this sort of graph that I drew in my mind of, well, the tangent needs to change pretty rapidly if I'm going to solve these existential questions that I had, that they weren't being answered.
Exactly. But it is a strange world. It is fine for me that people do whatever they want to do and whatever they want to believe. But what is extremely sad is that the spiritual world is what it is, with so much religious, meaning samsaric, self-deluded features that completely waters down and messes up the purpose of it. So I think that our community is very small, but I wish for many years my wish has been that other teachers would try our practices and would try the 13 Bhumi model and see that whether it works or not, see if it makes sense or not. Over the years there has been people who have emailed me that, hello Baba, you have never heard of me, I'm this man or woman from France or Canada or from wherever they might be, you have never heard of me, but I've actually listened to your guided meditations in YouTube for a couple of years and tried your practices, and it has completely changed my life. And not only in a general way changing my life, but having those awakening experiences. I remember there was this one lady, Christine from Canada, who sent me an email. You can find this from Open Heart blog, our email correspondence. She gave me a permission to publish it, and it's been a few years, so it's not fresh in my memory, but she told me that she had been practicing some form of Buddhist meditation for a number of years, and then at first had made progress, felt she made progress, but then hit a plateau. And that's when she decided to look into other teachings, methods, and found Amrita Mandala, and then started practicing Guru Yoga and dynamic concentration, which means dynamically shouting mantras in a controlled way. And then she had all Bhumi openings of 13 Bhumis, or 11, 12, or 13, within a matter of months, without ever joining any of our retreats, without ever paying me €1 or $1, without ever any contact, just from the books and recorded videos on YouTube. So for years, I don't have that many resources, and it is the case that for one reason or the other, there are not that many people who come to Amrita Mandala. But nevertheless, it is my wish that the information and the practices would get out there in the world. I have always told my students that if you find a method and practices that works better than the practices that I teach in Amrita Mandala, you should immediately go and follow that method, because that is what I would do. But I don't know such a method at the moment. So I have taught these practices that I have received from my gurus, what I've been told to teach, and what I see in my students is progress, like it should be. Yeah, no belief required. It's yoga, no belief accepted.
This is the end of part 1. Part 2 of the interview coming soon.